Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
When someone was at their lowest, most vulnerable, she was the officer that they needed.
I think people would be shocked to see that the challenges that they face every day.
Grief and remembrance for a Burnaby Mountie killed in the line of duty. Jail time for a former soccer coach who pleaded guilty to sex crimes involving young former players. And launching his defense, the lawyers for Surrey's outgoing mayor make their case in Doug McCallum's public mischief trial.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. It was a quiet, somber scene in our province today as first responders joined the family and loved ones of RCMP Constable Shaelyn Yang to pay their final respects to the fallen officer. Thousands of people gathered in Richmond for today's service. The CBC's Lindsay Duncombe was there and has our top story.
These are the traditions of mourning, grief shared shoulder to shoulder. A riderless horse, in its stirrups, the boots of the officer killed on duty. Old rituals in the face of new risks for Canada's police officers.
I think for my personal experience, I can look at the changes in homelessness and drug addiction, mental health resources or the absence of resources for those things, and the expectation that the police are the stopgap for those.
Constable Shaelyn Yang was an outreach officer on the front lines of the crises in homelessness and mental health. Yang was stabbed when she accompanied a municipal worker in Burnaby, BC, to check on a man in a tent in a park. He's since been charged with murder.
Everything she did was defined by her empathy, her compassion, and her belief that she could change the world.
Her family remembered the woman who excelled at martial arts, who married her wife in a red tuxedo. The head of the BC RCMP acknowledges the job is changing.
I think it is more difficult. It is more complex because I think we rely now on police to do more than what we previously relied upon them to do.
This man knows that firsthand. His daughter just started as an RCMP constable in Burnaby.
I think people would be shocked to see that the challenges that they face every day and some of the things that get said to them almost on a hourly, daily basis. I think a lot of people would be very surprised.
Showing up here, a way to recognize the dangers of the job and the pain of the loss. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Richmond.
Well, thousands of officers gathered for the service in Richmond, as you saw. People in Burnaby stopped to pay their respects to the officer who served that community. More now from the CBC's John Hernandez.
She paid the ultimate sacrifice in keeping the public safe, and this is the very least we could do for her.
As the sea of red uniforms and sunken hearts passed by, Charlene Toll reflected on what she has to lose. Her husband is a police officer.
It's important to show them that we're here for them.
A sentiment echoed by many family members of the first responders who marched.
My son is with the fire department, with Richmond, and so I'm here to support all of them.
In Burnaby, just down the street from where Constable Shaelyn Yang was killed, a public viewing of her funeral was held. Many in the neighborhood still shaken.
A young officer that got a new career, really happy, and she lost out. That's why I showed up. And I feel badly.
The venue, also a space for city employees to mourn. Many worked closely with Yang and other officers.
All staff have access to counseling services, and we've encouraged staff to talk about how they're feeling and to share that as appropriate. But there have been other sessions that have been provided as well. The RCMP have brought in trauma dogs.
Meanwhile, community leaders vow to continue Yang's legacy of service.
As a church family, we actively support the Society to End Homelessness in Burnaby. And I think, are there things that we could do that we're not doing, right? To help those who are struggling with mental health issues.
And are urging others to do the same.
It's an inspiration to all of us to live in a way that is selfless and thinks of the good of the broader community.
Lost but far from forgotten in the community she left behind. John Hernandez, CBC News, Burnaby.
And stay with us. We will have more on the service for Constable Shaelyn Yang later in the show, including a chat with RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki. Meanwhile, the man charged with killing Constable Yang appeared in court this morning. Jong Win Ham is charged with first-degree murder. He appeared in Vancouver Provincial Court by video from the North Fraser Pretrial Centre. The case is still in the bail phase of proceedings. The matter was put over for 2 weeks. Bob Berarda, the former Team Canada and Vancouver Whitecaps women's soccer coach, has been handed 2 years in jail. That verdict comes after he pleaded guilty to sex crimes involving young former players. The CBC's Karen Larson has more from Provincial Court in North Vancouver.
The sentence for former women's soccer coach Bob Berarda breaks down like this: 16 months in jail, followed by 8 months of house arrest. Back in February, Berarda pleaded guilty to 3 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of sexually touching a young person. The charges relate to 4 former players who were 16, 17, and 18 at the time of the offenses. And those offenses took place over a time period of 20 years between 1988 and 2008. Allegations involving this misconduct with players became public in 2019 in a blog post written by a former player, Kira McCormick. In 2008, Berarda was quietly dismissed as head coach of the Canadian women's under-20 team and the head coach of the women's Whitecaps team for incidents and text messages involving players not related to these criminal charges. Today, Judge Johanna Wagstaffe said aggravating circumstances include the multiple victims and repetition of the offenses against teen girls across 2 decades, elements of grooming, and Berarda's betrayal of trust as a coach and mentor. She said mitigating circumstances were Berarda's sincere expression of remorse and that he was a low risk to reoffend. The charges also include 3 years of probation. Karen Larson, CBC News, North Vancouver.
Outgoing Surrey Mayor Doug McCallum's public mischief trial carried on today with his defense making its case. McCallum is accused of lying to police after he claimed a political opponent ran over his foot in a supermarket parking lot last September. As Yasmin Gandam explains, much of today's testimony centered on McCallum's alleged injuries.
Doug McCallum's lawyers began mounting his defense today, telling court the outgoing Surrey mayor could have been run over by Debbie Johnstone, and whether or not he embellished his story to police, he was justified in filing criminal complaints against her. McCallum has been accused of public mischief for allegedly misleading police into believing Johnstone committed an offense by intentionally running over his foot in a Save on Foods parking lot last fall. He has pleaded not guilty. At the time, Johnstone was campaigning with Keep the RCMP in Surrey, a group opposed to McCallum's plans to install a municipal police force in the city. Police have doubted McCallum's claims in part because CCTV video showed he wasn't pinned to his car as he claimed, and he didn't limp after the incident. Today, 2 engineers took the stand as witnesses. The first referenced 2 studies involving foot rollovers, one involving live people that resulted in friction injuries and few fractures, and then one involving cadavers causing no fractures. He claimed that just because McCallum does not have a fracture does not mean his foot was not run over. The second witness, a mechanical engineer, took photos of the crime scene and testified that if McCallum was standing as close to the vehicle as he appeared, the rear wheel could have in fact run over his foot. The radiologist who analyzed X-ray images of McCallum's foot following the incident also testified today. He determined there was moderate soft tissue swelling, but the Crown questioned him, saying there is no way to know whether the incident in question caused the swelling because no X-ray images exist from before the incident or of the other foot. 2 other witnesses will be called by the defense, but due to scheduling conflicts, the trial will resume next week. Yasmin Gandam, CBC News, Surrey.
The Surrey Teachers Association says a lack of specialist educators has led to an increase in violent incidents. It says there's been consistent and widespread loss in services and support for kids at schools, especially vulnerable children, leading to massive disruption in some classrooms with violent outbursts like kicking and biting. Now the association is calling for a rise in specialist teachers. BC's education minister says she hasn't yet heard from the group, but notes safety is paramount.
Safety of staff and students in our school environments is a top priority. We're in the process of the ratification of the tentative agreement now, and ongoing conversations around our recruitment and retention. Certainly, those will be ongoing.
Earlier this week, the BC Teachers Federation reached a tentative agreement with the province, which does include a salary bump. Now to a scene in Delta on Halloween night that spiraled out of control. Police are asking for your help to identify teenagers they say threw fireworks at officers and other young people. The force says about 400 people, most of them teenagers, were gathered in Denison Park Monday night. That's directly across from South Delta Secondary School. They estimate $10,000 worth of fireworks were lit over 4 hours, some of them aimed directly at other people. One teenage girl suffered serious burns after her jacket caught fire, and 2 officers also suffered minor injuries.
What our officers witnessed and experienced was several of the youth in that group firing fireworks at other youth, at bystanders, at the officers. If the officers went into the field area to try and intervene, they became targets of the fireworks. So we saw really irresponsible behavior, dangerous behavior. We are looking at the act of shooting a firework intentionally at somebody else as an assault with a weapon. It's a criminal code offense, so it would be investigated under the criminal code.
Police are now asking for anyone with information from that night to come forward. The Delta School District said in a statement, quote, "We're extremely disappointed with students' complete lack of regard for each other, first responders, and the local community," and says the behavior of students on Monday night was completely unacceptable. The district adds it is assisting with the police investigation. Home sales continue to trend down across the Lower Mainland. The Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver says home sales slumped almost 50% in October compared to the same time last year. That's despite an almost 13% increase in sales since last month. The board says inflation and rising interest rates are to blame for that slowdown. There are also more homes on the market right now, meaning prices are dropping after reaching historic highs last spring. Social media giant Hootsuite says it is laying off another 5% of its staff. The move comes just months after the Vancouver-based tech giant fired 30% of its workers as part of a global restructuring. Hootsuite says the latest firings came after areas of duplication, reduced or slowed demand, and management. One local tech journalist says the move comes as a bit of a surprise.
The second round of layoffs is surprising for a lot of people because usually when companies make these types of large-scale layoffs, really they designed the first round to be the last round because a lot of people think about what these employees are going through and how that can be quite unnerving to be working at an organization where you have to think about your job security.
Hootsuite was first founded in Vancouver in 2008. Half of Metro Vancouver residents are open to combining some or all of our region's 21 municipalities. That's the finding from an online survey from the Angus Reid Institute. It shows 42% of people who took part support partial amalgamation, and 8% support merging all municipal governments in Metro Vancouver. Nearly half, or 48% of respondents on the North Shore, say they support a merger of North Vancouver and West Vancouver. Meanwhile, 41%, or about 2 in 5 residents in the Tri-Cities, believe Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and Port Moody ought to join forces.
There is an openness among half of the people living in this region to, if not full amalgamation, in other words, seeing Metro Vancouver become one big megacity, there's certainly some openness to seeing certain suburbs that are next to each other, that are neighbors, that have some of the same issues, perhaps making more sense as one governable body.
The surveyors note individual support for a consolidated government coincides with satisfaction with local governments and whether they think it's more effective for multiple communities to tackle issues like housing and crime. Angus Reid conducted that survey from a sample of almost 1,400 adults who live in Metro Vancouver. The BC government says old-growth logging has declined to record lows, down 42% since 2015. Last year, more than 38,000 hectares of old growth was logged in the province. The government says that represents only 0.3% of all old-growth forest. In a statement, the Ministry of Forests says the latest numbers show that BC is on the right track as it works to develop and implement new long-term solutions for better managing, preserving, and sharing the benefits of our forests. Some activists, however, remain skeptical.
It's encouraging to hear that the overall rate of old growth logging is falling. What's needed is more information. There's really nothing in today's announcement that underscores or highlights where old growth logging is continuing, whether it's still happening in the most at-risk old growth forest, which is our concern.
Const says BC committed to the recommendations outlined in the strategic review more than 2 years ago. One of them was to protect the most at-risk old-growth forests. He argues there's no indication that planned logging in the most at-risk forests is slowing down. Time to chat with meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe for the first inkling of the forecast. What was the word I heard today a lot? Crisp. People liked it outside.
Yes.
They get to wear their fancy jackets.
Oh, yes. So we get...
Collars upturned.
I was just going to say, we get but 3 leather jacket days a year here in Vancouver. And today was one of them. It was gorgeous. Crisp and colorful was the other word I heard, with the blue skies and the gorgeous leaves. We are in between 2 systems. But as we speak, the next weather maker is approaching from the west. So this spinning low is what brought us those cumulus and downpours yesterday. That's sinking off to the southeast. But you can see that cloud band moving in from the northwest. That's the leading edge of our next atmospheric river. So yes, this is a river event, meaning that we will see wide-scale transport of moisture from the subtropics. This is not on the scale of the event almost 1 year ago, but it is still moderate. And we've already had a couple of atmospheric river events this year. We do get them. This one coming, though, has prompted some warnings. Right now, we are looking at a special weather statement for the south coast, all of Metro Vancouver included. This is for Thursday through Friday because we're getting the rain. We are going to get some snow down around 300 meters possibly tomorrow. And then we're going to get some good winds, upwards of 80 kilometers per hour. So there is a risk for some trees down and localized flooding over the next 2 days. And you can see those snowfall warnings, Williams Lake, North Thompson, up towards Prince George for snow tomorrow. So Dan, the weather is changing dramatically, and I'll break it down in a little bit.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Sports news now. Canadian and world soccer phenom Christine Sinclair is extending her stay in the Pacific Northwest. The Burnaby native is re-signed with the Portland Thorns just 3 days after she helped that team win the National Women's Soccer League title. A crowd gathered in the city to celebrate the team's 2-0 win over the Kansas City Current.
What you see is just the growth of the league, that each championship seems to mean more, which is exciting. And having been here for 10 years, it's what I always wanted, is this league to just grow and flourish.
This will be Sinclair's 11th season with the club, her home since entering the National Women's Soccer League in 2013. As the team's captain, Sinclair has played in 14 matches so far this season and scored 5 goals. And, of course, she is the world's all-time leading goal scorer. Some homeowners in Winnipeg played unfortunate and unwilling hosts this weekend after hundreds of people descended on their property for a party, but they weren't home. How neighbors in Mounties responded after this. Welcome to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream. Thanks for being here. The town of Indian Head, Saskatchewan is under debate as people question whether it's time to change that name. Some say the choice ought to be up to Indigenous people in the area. The CBC's Laura Sharpaletti has more.
Drive a mere 70 kilometers east of Regina, and you'll be greeted by a large monument of the head of an Indigenous person. This is the town of Indian Head, Saskatchewan. It's been a hot topic online lately. The host of the Canadian History X podcast recently posted a TikTok video about the origin of the town's name.
So I thought, you know what, I'd ask you guys, what do you think? Should the name of Indian Head, Saskatchewan be changed to something else?
Craig Baird says a lot of people say it's up to the Indigenous people to decide, while others
You have the usual people who see it as, the woke movement and, we're trying to erase history, which obviously isn't the case when you change the name of a town. It's happened many times in Canada over the past century.
The official version of how Indian Head was named states that in the 1800s, First Nations people were ravaged by diseases such as smallpox brought west by fur traders. Their remains were placed in the nearby hills and inspired the name. That's similar to the story Matthew Spencer heard from Carry the Kettle Nakota elders. He sees the name as a tribute to history.
I believe it's a good teachable moment. It's a very, very good educational tool to see that, where things are in terms of reconciliation, names of towns and names of places like that. I'm not offended at all about it.
But others in town don't agree. Métis knowledge keeper Malona Biller was born and raised in Indian Head. She dislikes the name.
I've never liked it because I'm not comfortable with the term Indian. And growing up, it wasn't in this town, back then, it was very derogatory, and it was used quite negatively against the people with First Nations ancestry.
A community development committee has discussed whether there is interest in changing the name, but it has not been discussed by town council. One councillor says he wants to keep the name.
Reconciliation it's ongoing and needed. But if we keep changing everything, then the future generations will just forget how it came about, that happened.
Many in town say young people are pushing this debate forward. But for now, the Indian Head name remains a remnant of times past. Laura Sharpaletti, CBC News, Regina.
Earlier in the show, we took you to the regimental funeral for RCMP Constable Shaelyn Yang. The 31-year-old homeless and mental health outreach officer was killed on the job in Burnaby last month. Here's more from a day of remembrance.
The choices we make matter. What we believe in matters. It is my hope that what made Shaelyn Yang so extraordinary will become ordinary, and that heroism will become synonymous with humanity, because she has shown us all that there should not be a distinction between one and the other, and that the union of the two is a beautiful thing indeed.
She always acted with integrity. She showed respect to all. Her natural compassion for others was exceptional, and she was quick to take responsibility and most certainly served with excellence. Shaelyn's death is a stark reminder of the inherent dangers that all police officers face in the line of duty. Today, we are again reminded that we never know what the next call of service will bring. We will always remember Shaelyn for her unflinching bravery and selflessness when faced with lethal danger on that day, October 18th.
As loved ones and other Canadians mourn Constable Yang, there are questions about her death and whether changes are needed on how police respond to calls involving people with complex needs. CBC reporter Lindsay Duncombe spoke with the RCMP Commissioner today and the Mountie who oversees BC. Here's that discussion.
Her selflessness stood out for me, how she has led a life of service well before she joined the RCMP. Her compassion and kindness for the vulnerable, people in their most dire times of their life, and she's there to help. That really stood out for me, and it obviously resonated with all of her colleagues at Burnaby Detachment. You know, things have changed in the world with mental health, addictions, homelessness, and, you know, people can say it isn't a policing responsibility, but I think it's in partnership with the various social services, because some situations are far too dangerous for social services. So I think it's important that we work together to help the vulnerable in the communities, to help the homeless, to help people with addictions. And if we think we can do this by ourselves, we will never succeed.
So how hard is it then to lose someone for whom that was their whole job, their passion?
It's very difficult, but you know, for me it fuels my fire in the sense that we need to do better. We need to make changes that can help all Canadians in distress, the vulnerable, and work better together. So, you know, I want to make sure that Constable Shaelyn Yang's life was not in vain and that we do everything we can to help the people that she was trying to help. Our members are well trained to deal with these situations, but they aren't predictable. Nothing in policing is predictable, so we rely on our training, and sometimes that training, you know, despite our best efforts, sometimes we lose an officer, and you know, it makes us revisit the situation. We're going to review the situation. We're going to look and see if there was anything that could be done better in training, that could be done better in our approaches, just to make sure that we don't have to go through this again.
But I think as society, we are more aware now of people that are in crisis. We're more likely to reach out for help. And oftentimes, the police of jurisdiction, whether they be RCMP or municipal police officers or otherwise, they're the first point of contact. We always answer the phone. It's 911 and everybody knows our number. So we're usually the first line of response. I've seen the unfortunate video of the incident, and I'm aware of the reason that they were there. And I can say, without getting into too much detail, that this was not a call that on the face of it would heighten your level of concern or anxiety. And unfortunately, situations present themselves for officers. We have to make risk assessments before, during a call. And I don't believe that this instance, it was predictable. It's tragic, it is devastating. I can say that Constable Yang responded incredibly well in incredibly challenging circumstances, and probably saved the life of the parks employee.
What does that tell you about her as an officer?
She's brave. Brave and above all willing to sacrifice herself to help others.
They brought Ottawa's downtown core to a not-so-silent standstill for more than 3 weeks. But were Convoy organizers receiving leaks from police? More from the inquiry after this.
Anyone who has to make this daily grind from this part of the lower Fraser Valley to Vancouver knows the frustrations of bumper-to-bumper traffic. On some days, it takes people more than an hour and a half to get to work if they have to use the Barnett Highway. The plan calls for the highway to be increased in size to 4 lanes and the widening of Hastings Street with a parking ban. Traffic in the morning would use 3 lanes heading west and reverse the direction at night. Additional buses and carpool vehicles would use the extra lanes exclusively. Area mayors say they approve.
I think it's a great one. I really do. It's not the total answer, but I think it's a great plus that the government has decided to widen the Barnett Highway.
We can't just build more roads to make it more convenient for the automobile. We're not going to build our way out of it that way. We've got to look at the high-capacity vehicles, the public transit systems, the high-occupancy vehicles like the carpooling and so on.
Mayor Copeland also says he's concerned about merchants on Hastings Street who would be affected by the no parking ban.
If there are parking restrictions, they only be for a period of time in the morning, maybe between 7 and 9 in the mornings. The opposite side of the street then have parking restrictions 4 to 6.
Carpooling was tried 10 years ago in Vancouver, but it didn't work. The city had a number set up commuters could call. Unfortunately, few drivers applied. But the number is still in use, and I think we'll call it right now.
Good morning, Carpool.
Yes, is that the Commuter Club?
Yes, it is.
Could you help me? I'm looking for a ride to get from the western part of Vancouver to East Vancouver.
I have nothing available at all.
Is there anything ever available?
There hasn't been in the last while.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for calling.
Right,
Bye-bye.
So you can see, the club is still not used very much.
The people using the Barnett Highway I talked to like the idea.
A great idea, but I can't find anyone from Langley that'd like to ride with me to Port Moody.
Oh, I think it's a good idea.
You think it's going to come?
I think it has to.
Carpooling. If I had people going my way, sure. No problems.
Unless some plan of action is not implemented soon, lineups like this one are likely to increase. And that's what it might take to make people realize that carpooling may be at least a partial solution. Bob Gillingham, CBC News on the Barnett Highway.
We're learning more about a massive house party near Winnipeg that led to quite a confrontation with police over the weekend. Take a look. RCMP had to call for backup when they arrived Saturday night to a crowd of hundreds of teenagers, many believed to be drunk, and the situation spiraled out of control. The CBC's Cameron McIntosh has more.
Video posted to social media shows people jumping on the roofs of RCMP cars, smashing out a windshield, and confronting police.
There were some racial slurs yelled towards the officers. They'd been spit at.
RCMP also say they had fireworks shot at them and broke up one attempted sexual assault.
We do believe there's a high potential for other violent offenses to have occurred.
It happened late Saturday at this house just outside of Winnipeg. The owners were out of province. This neighbor says he drove by around 11.
We pulled into the neighborhood and we just saw 20 sirens, like police cars. There must have been 400, 500 people. They were everywhere. They were in the bushes. Our video cameras caught them running across our yard. Police actually chasing them through our yard.
In the end, it took officers from 4 RCMP detachments and help from Winnipeg police to break it all up.
There was definite public consumption of alcohol, and some of the stuff our officers saw, both outside and within the house, included illicit drug use.
Several people were arrested. Charges are pending. How it all started and got so big, so out of control, is still under investigation.
We have heard several different versions of events.
CBC News has reached out to the homeowners who haven't responded. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
The protesters who occupied downtown Ottawa for 3 weeks last winter received leaked information from police. That came up during testimony today into the inquiry into the federal government's use of the Emergencies Act. As Rafi Boudjikanian shows us, it came from a lawyer for some of the organizers who also testified there were significant rifts within the protest leadership.
It's not just free passage. Police granted the convoy of protesters for weeks, the inquiry heard today.
There was numerous times where information would come into the operations center from various police sources that a raid was imminent.
In his witness statement, Keith Wilson, who legally represented some convoy organizers during the protest, also mentioned eventually the police caught on and appeared to launch fake operations to throw off the Freedom Convoy participants and test where the leaks were coming from. A range of sources he later claimed, from Ottawa Police to CSIS.
I don't know the intricacies, but obviously someone would have been in a room or got a memo or an email saying, this is what we're doing Friday night. And then they would call someone and say, hey, phone so-and-so, and let them know this is what's going.
But it wasn't all an airing of alliances. Wilson also sought to distance himself and some convoy leaders from those calling for the government's overthrow at the time.
I explained that there's only two ways that governments change under our parliamentary system. The first is when the Prime Minister contacts the Governor General and dissolves Parliament. The second, through parliamentary tradition, is where a bill is identified as a confidence vote.
And from an organizer he deemed too extremist.
Pat King, you testified that you knew him from about a year before the convoy protest, is that right?
Yeah, like I wasn't at his house or anything. The first time I was in physical presence of Mr. King was when he showed up in a boardroom in Ottawa during the protest, and it was about 2 or 3 days in, and I immediately instructed him to leave the room. Not him, I told the people around he's got to go.
The rift between different convoy organizers is likely to be only further exposed as more of them testify over the course of the week. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
Turning now to Russia's war on Ukraine, diplomacy from Turkey appears to have saved the deal on Ukrainian wheat shipments. Turkey says Russia will return to the agreement that allows grain ships out of Ukraine's ports. Russian President Vladimir Putin put the deal on hold over the weekend after drone strikes on its Black Sea fleet. Despite Moscow's refusal to guarantee safe passage, shipments went ahead this week. Turkey and the UN brokered that agreement back in July to head off a worsening global food crisis. Ukrainian wheat and grain exports are crucial to feed people in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Israel is poised to have a right-wing coalition government headed by former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He and his bloc lead the country's ongoing election vote count. Margaret Evans shows us what the new government could mean for that country.
A little deja vu. The former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife Sarah celebrating a result they believe will hand him back the keys to the country and making promises. I'll establish a government that will take care of all Israeli citizens, he says, without exception, all of them. That's not the message his potential coalition partner Itamar Ben-Gvir was delivering to his supporters. This is the time we return to being the landlords of our own country, he told them. That's a not-so-coded message for Palestinian citizens of Israel. Ben-Gvir, known for his anti-Arab views, convicted of incitement in the past. This was him last month in occupied East Jerusalem, urging police to shoot Palestinian protesters throwing stones. Netanyahu is relying on the religious right to help him build a coalition. Ben-Gvir already indicating he wants the ministry in charge of the police in exchange for his support. Palestinians in the occupied territory say the Israeli election result could well be the final blow for a two-state solution already on life support.
It means that the Israeli society opted
for extreme racism and for killing any opportunity for peace.
Some analysts say foreign capitals may pressure Netanyahu not to include the extreme right.
Netanyahu may decide that it is unbecoming for somebody who wants to be considered an important global player, especially within the family of Western democratic nations, to have to answer questions all the time.
But that would limit his options. And if there's one thing Netanyahu has proven time and again, it's his desire to win. Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
Military tensions have spiked on the Korean peninsula again. The North launched a string of missile tests today, and as Abby Kuavasan reports, the South quickly responded.
A flurry of missiles being fired this morning on the Korean peninsula. It started with North Korea launching at least 10 in the initial phase into the waters near South Korea. One short-range ballistic missile hit south of the demarcation line, which separates the two Koreas for the first time. Pyongyang has refused to recognize the maritime border, but Seoul sees today's breach as a significant escalation. The weapon landed about 165 kilometers away from the South Korean island of Uljong. Air raid sirens blared and morning TV programs asked the island's some 9,000 residents to take cover. Professor Steve Zhang is an expert on the region and says Kim Jong-un has two goals.
I think he is basically seeking attention, and he's also genuinely testing his missiles. Mr. Kim did get a lot of attention from Donald Trump. He has really not got any kind of attention from Joe Biden.
The South Korean president called for a firm response to the initial missile launches this morning. That response came quickly. South Korean fighter jets fired 3 air-to-surface missiles in waters near North Korea in retaliation. Before it fired any missiles this morning, Pyongyang had demanded that the United States and South Korea stop joint military exercises. These large-scale drills have angered Kim Jong-un in previous years as well. North Korea has repeatedly said it will not give up its nuclear arsenal. American intelligence believes the Hermit Kingdom is preparing to test its 7th nuclear weapon. Abby Kuavasan, CBC News, London.
It is a lively event to remember loved ones who are no longer with us. After the break, we'll take you to a local Day of the Dead celebration.
We're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
People on Granville Island took to the streets there to celebrate Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead. The holiday is a Mexican tradition where families get together to honor the memories of loved ones who have moved on from this life. There's dancing and costumes, skull-shaped treats, and special altars of remembrance called ofrendas that are decorated with marigold flowers. According to belief, on Dia de los Muertos, the souls of the departed can come back to visit the land of the living. And a lovely day for a visit, otherwise, with meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe. Gorgeous day out there. Sun, and what did we say? Crisp?
Crisp and colorful is sort of what we're going with for today. It was a beauty of a day out there, and already the cloud beginning to sneak in from the west. The other thing we're watching, cold temperatures tonight. If you felt that crispness this morning, it's going to get a whole lot cooler tonight. In fact, right now, sub-zero in Princeton at the -1 mark. YVR hanging on to a 6, but tonight getting down to the freezing mark. So this is going to be one of our chillier starts tomorrow morning. I want to get right to the rainfall totals with the system that's moving in. The rain for Metro Vancouver to start mid-morning, late morning, early afternoon for Metro Vancouver. That'll move across the island mid-morning. So pausing you, this is actually taking you right through to the weekend, but over the next 48 hours is where we're going to see the most of the rainfall totals, and that's upwards of 80 millimeters. Now, higher amounts will be highly variable, higher amounts towards the island and the North Shore, but this is a significant rain event. Again, 80 millimeters on tap for parts of Metro Vancouver Thursday through Friday, and this is also going to come with shifting temperatures and strong winds. So I just want to pause you tomorrow evening. That's when we're really going to get into that pulse of the atmospheric river. Again, a reminder that on the sort of 1 to 5 scale, if last year's event was a 4 or a 5, this one is a 2. So bordering on, we are worried about some flooding and possible power outages, but this is also continually adding the moisture we need. We are still in a deficit. A lot of snow with this event as well. That moisture is hopping over the Rockies. And once we get through this event tomorrow, we get a bit of a break on Saturday. And then Sunday, watch this low as it skirts down the coast. What this will do is pull down the first true modified Arctic air mass of the season for much of BC for next week. So I really want to break down this forecast, starting with our 2 atmospheric river days coming up. Wet snow possible around 300 meters. Mid-morning tomorrow as this event starts, and again tomorrow evening. So usual suspects, North Shore, Burnaby Mountain, you might see some wet snow before those snow levels really rise. Look at the afternoon highs on Friday. That's a 12. This is when we're going to watch for those 80 kilometer per hour winds. And then, Dan, let me draw your eye to the -1.
It has been drawn.
It has been drawn. Yes.
That minus symbol. -3.
-3. And that might be -5 or -7. I'll have to hone in. This is our first cold, clear forecast that we've had yet this season.
No kidding. Fall is officially here.
Yep.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
WestJet and Air Canada are fighting back against compensation claims from their passengers. They've now launched legal battles to appeal payment orders over flight disruptions. As Sophia Harris explains, the outcomes of these first-of-their-kind cases could affect other claims as well.
So these are my photos from my Costa Rica trip.
Simon Uramian enjoyed his Costa Rica vacation in July, but not the trip home. Air Canada canceled his return flight, causing a 7-hour delay. At the time, the airline blamed crew constraints linked to COVID-19. Under federal rules, airlines must compensate passengers up to $1,000 if the flight disruption is within their control and not safety-related. In an email, Air Canada rejected Uramian's compensation claim, stating the flight cancellation was safety-related.
I think it's just they're just labeling it as safety issues to try to get around paying people compensation.
Air Canada told CBC News the cancellation involved weather and crew availability and didn't warrant compensation. Uramian is considering filing a complaint with the Canadian Transportation Agency. The CTA has already ruled on 2 cases involving staffing shortages, one with Air Canada and the other WestJet. In each case, the airlines were ordered to pay compensation. The CTA also stated airlines generally have control over staffing issues unless they can prove otherwise. But it's not case closed. Both WestJet and Air Canada have launched legal battles in federal court to appeal the decisions, arguing the CTA misinterpreted the rules.
We meet our obligations.
In WestJet's case, this company executive argues it had no choice but to cancel the flight because a pilot called in sick shortly before takeoff.
We do believe it was a safety issue, and that's why we're appealing, and that's what the court will rule on.
This consumer advocate says if WestJet and Air Canada are successful in court, certain compensation claims may no longer fly.
If they get to win on this legalistic argument, any staffing disruption is out of their control, which seems bizarre for an employer.
The CTA declined to comment. According to the agency, since May, air passengers have filed more than 16,000 complaints involving flight disruptions. Sophia Harris, CBC News, Toronto.
With little over a week until Remembrance Day, some Canadian students met a real-life war veteran today. Up next, why their teacher thought it was important to spend some quality time with them, with that member of the Canadian Armed Forces.
Watching over a new bakery in his name, Jamie Adeo Jr.'s presence is felt.
I'm really speechless today because I always remember him and I want to continue his legacy.
Jimboy's Delicacies opened in Garden City on Friday. The store is named after Jamie Adeo Jr., who was affectionately known as Jimboy by his family and friends. The 17-year-old was murdered in a random home invasion in 2019. His violent stabbing shook Winnipeg.
He is a good kid, a good son, and a good friend.
And devastated the city's tight-knit Filipino community. A community that's continued to rally behind the teen's parents, Imelda and Jamie Adeo Sr., supporting their new bakery and coffee shop during its grand opening Friday. The bakery is the family's 4th store to open and will serve all-day breakfast in addition to many Filipino buns and treats, all in Jimboy's name.
Oh, he's gone, he's in heaven. We're still continuing what his dream is. So we are here again. Never stop dreaming.
Jimboy was a talented baker who was well-liked by his high school friends. The teen was just months away from graduating when he was murdered. Shortly after his death, his parents received an honorary diploma in his name. The men responsible for his killing are now behind bars. And more than 3 years after their son's murder, Adeo's parents refused to let him be forgotten.
In my heart, we're still grieving, dear. It's never ending. But I know that he's happy watching us and continuing his legacy, my dear.
A legacy that is ongoing with Jimboy looking ahead. Austin Grabish, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Celebrate Chinese-Canadian music and entertainment at the Jade Music Festival, November 28th to December 3rd. View the schedule at jmfa.ca. And on December 7th, join Anita Bath and a panel of Indigenous business leaders at the Surrey Board of Trade's online Entrepreneur Showcase. Register for the free discussion today at businessinsurrey.com.
With Remembrance Day just over a week away, more than 100 students visited Vancouver's Mountain View Cemetery today for an interactive pre-Remembrance Day ceremony.
There is a traditional order that the No Stone Left Alone organization, some key elements like Flanders Fields, the commitments to remember, obviously the moments of silence, things like that they want in every ceremony, but then there's also an ability to be flexible. So, for example, this year we included the prayer for Ukraine, or added the prayer for the Indigenous veterans and information about that as part of Truth and Reconciliation.
Students from St. Helens and St. Mary's elementary schools gathered alongside cadets and soldiers. They saluted veterans, placed poppies on gravestones, and shared prayers for peace. The event was hosted by the No Stone Left Alone Memorial Foundation as a way to engage young people in honoring Canada's veterans. As time passes, there are fewer veterans still alive from the major wars of the 20th century, so those who have served in more recent conflicts are taking up the torch. This week, a veteran of the war in Afghanistan took the message to a group of grade 3 students in Montreal. Simon Nakonechny was there.
Remembrance Day.
You can place next to your heart.
To remember all the people who died in the war.
Because they're people like us and they deserve to live a long, happy life.
The First World War ended at 11 o'clock in the morning on the 11th of November.
They were fighting and then they passed away.
It is a big topic, but I think it's important that they start, especially when they hear it. You want to make sure that they're getting factual information from credible news sources that are age appropriate.
So for me, I think the best way to explain it to young children is through the idea of service. So when someone else opens the door for you or helps you pick up something you dropped on the floor, they're doing you a service. And essentially that's what Canadian Armed Forces members are doing, as a service to Canada. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow.
Poppy, and it's a flower. It's the only flower that grew after the war.
I think it's important that we acknowledge the great courage and sacrifice it took for soldiers who fought in the World War I and II, but also the soldiers who continue to serve us today.
We see some of the older veterans are, unfortunately, their best days are behind them. So we have to kind of pick up the torch, as in Flanders Fields it basically says.
We stand it up and we put our arm like this.
We put our hand on our poppy where our heart is.
I'll be also personally remembering some of the friends and soldiers along which I served and that have not come back home or have come back home when different and that are facing challenges day to day on their lives. Here's another nice one. They're all nice.
I think the goal at the end of all of this is just the students to leave here knowing that Canada is a peaceful place and it's a wonderful place to live in because of the sacrifices people made long ago, are still making today.
Flower, but to thank the soldiers that died.
Thank you for joining us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as on YouTube, Instagram, and our website, cbc.ca/BC. Leanne Young will be here with your late news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. We're going to leave you tonight with a regimental funeral for Burnaby RCMP Constable Shaelyn Yang. Good night.